The roar of engines, the thunder of artillery, and the acrid scent of smoke filled the horizon. It was 1943, somewhere in the forests of Eastern Europe, and the war had already claimed countless lives. Amid the chaos, a young German tank commander, Otto Carius, guided his Tiger I with the calm precision of a man who understood both machinery and mortality. To the untrained eye, the battlefield was madness. To Carius, it was a chessboard, each move calculated, each target deliberate. Born in 1922 in Zweibrücken, Germany, Carius had grown up fascinated by engines and machines. But nothing in his childhood hinted at the inferno he would face as a Panzer ace. By the time he reached the front lines, he was entrusted with one of the most formidable tanks of the war, a Tiger I. Its thick armor, powerful 88mm gun, and imposing presence made it a force to reckon with, yet it required a careful hand, a sharp mind, and nerves of steel to wield effectively. The battlefield was unforgiving. Trees splintered under shells, the ground churned with mud and blood, and every movement could mean life or death. But Carius thrived in this chaos. Observing the terrain, reading enemy formations, and anticipating the actions of Allied tanks became second nature. He learned quickly that brute force alone was not enough. Survival depended on creativity, positioning, and timing. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the scarred landscape, Carius moved his Tiger forward. Every decision, when to fire, when to retreat, when to strike from cover, was a matter of inches and seconds. The battlefield awaited, and in the heart of the storm, a legend in the making prepared to turn his machine into a weapon of calculated fury. Otto Carius's first days on the Eastern Front were a trial by fire. The forests and fields of Russia stretched endlessly, a patchwork of mud, snow, and shattered villages. Each engagement was unpredictable. Soviet tanks appeared from unexpected angles, infantry hid in ruined buildings, and artillery fire could erupt without warning. Yet it was here that Carius's instincts began to sharpen, each encounter molding him into a commander who could survive against overwhelming odds. The Tiger I was a marvel of engineering, but it was also cumbersome. Its sheer size made it slow to maneuver, and a miscalculation could leave it vulnerable. Carius quickly learned the importance of positioning and ambush tactics. He would use the natural terrain, a rise in the ground, a copse of trees, the shadows of ruined structures, to conceal his tank until the moment of attack. Then, with terrifying precision, the Tiger's 88mm gun would roar, sending Soviet T-34s spinning into fire and smoke. What set Carius apart was not just his marksmanship, but his creativity. He observed the behavior of enemy crews, noted their tendencies, and exploited them ruthlessly. A poorly placed T-34 could be forced into a kill zone. A group of advancing tanks could be lured into a crossfire. Each victory reinforced a simple truth: war was as much about the mind as it was about firepower. Even amidst the chaos, Carius remained calm. His crew trusted him implicitly, following his commands with confidence, knowing that every decision, when to strike, when to withdraw, when to reposition, was calculated. The smoke and noise of battle could not shake him. He moved like a shadow through the carnage, a figure of silent precision, commanding a mechanical beast. By the end of his first month, he had already claimed several kills. But these were only the first steps in a journey that would turn him into one of the deadliest tank aces the war had ever seen. By the winter of 1943, Carius had begun to understand that sheer firepower was only part of the equation. Victory on the Eastern Front required strategy, patience, and cunning. It was during a bitterly cold morning near the riverbanks of Kursk that he would execute one of his first memorable ambushes, a textbook display of tactical brilliance that would become his signature style. Carius positioned his tiger eye behind a ridge, hidden by snow-laden pines. The Soviet column advanced, confident and unaware, their T-34s rumbling through the frozen mud. From his perch, Carius studied them, noting gaps in formation, angles of approach, and likely escape routes. Every second was critical. Every movement could betray his presence. The tiger, massive and imposing, remained almost invisible in the winter landscape, its camouflage enhanced by shadows and smoke from distant skirmishes. When the first T-34 came into view, Carius waited. His finger hovered lightly on the trigger, his mind calculating trajectory, distance, and armor thickness. Then, with calm precision, the Tiger's 88mm gun cracked. The shot hit its mark, flipping the tank and sending a plume of smoke into the air. Panic rippled through the Soviet ranks, and Carius exploited it. One by one, the enemy tanks fell into his carefully planned trap. It wasn't luck, it was foresight, discipline, and a deep understanding of both his machine and his enemy. His crew moved seamlessly, executing orders with a quiet efficiency that matched their commander's cool demeanor. By the time the ambush concluded, several Soviet tanks were destroyed, and the battlefield lay silent except for the crackle of burning metal. That day, Otto Carius cemented his reputation. He was not just a tank operator. He was a strategist, a predator in steel, and a man who turned impossible odds into calculated victory.
With each engagement, Otto Carius's reputation grew. Fellow soldiers began to speak in hushed tones of the Tiger Ghost, a man who seemed to appear and vanish at will, striking from shadows with deadly efficiency. But Carius himself remained grounded, aware that each victory carried both a price and a lesson. Survival on the battlefield was as much about restraint as it was about aggression. He began to refine his approach. No longer relying solely on ambushes, Carius studied enemy tactics and terrain meticulously. He learned to anticipate Soviet movements, reading the slightest hints, the angle of a turret, the pattern of tracks in mud, or the timing of artillery barrages. Every detail mattered. His Tiger became an extension of his own instincts, moving not just as a machine, but almost as a living entity under his command. Yet, amidst the chaos, he was human. Nights were often spent in quiet reflection, counting the cost of war, acknowledging the lives lost on both sides. He wrote letters to family he rarely saw, detailing mundane thoughts to remind himself of life beyond the battlefield. These moments of introspection were critical, keeping his mind sharp and preventing the stress of constant danger from overwhelming him. By 1944, Otto Carius had become one of the most feared tank commanders on the Eastern Front. Allied intelligence reports noted the destruction of numerous T-34s attributed to a single Tiger, though few knew it was the precise work of one man's cunning and discipline. His approach combined daring maneuvers, careful planning, and a deep respect for the machinery he wielded. Every battlefield encounter strengthened his philosophy. Patience, observation, and decisiveness were the keys to survival and success. It was not merely the Tiger's armor or gun that made him lethal. It was Carius himself, a tactician whose mind could turn the tides of battle.
The summer of 1944 brought a confrontation that would test Otto Carius like never before. His unit was tasked with holding a strategic crossroads against a rapidly advancing Soviet offensive. The forested hills and narrow roads were alive with the sounds of artillery, gunfire, and the relentless roar of tanks. It was a setting where a single mistake could spell disaster. Carius carefully positioned his tiger eye behind a ruined farmhouse, using the broken walls as cover. Through the periscope, he observed the advancing Soviet armor. Over 30 T-34s emerged from the tree line, their crews confident, unaware of the trap awaiting them. The odds were staggering, but Carius remained calm. His strategy was simple, yet deadly. Let the enemy overextend, isolate individual tanks, and strike with precision. The first T-34 moved too close to cover, and the Tiger's 88mm gun fired. The shot was perfect. The tank erupted in flames. Panic spread through the Soviet ranks. Carius methodically targeted tanks one by one, exploiting every tactical error. Each kill was executed with a calculated calm, as though he were playing a grim game of chess with steel and fire. Amid the chaos, his crew operated seamlessly, trusting every command without question. They had fought alongside Carius long enough to understand his rhythm, anticipating moves, adjusting positions, and covering blind spots. Every second counted, and the battle became a ballet of destruction orchestrated by a single mind. By the end of the engagement, over half of the enemy tanks were destroyed, and the strategic crossroads remained in German hands. Carius's actions that day not only saved countless comrades, but also cemented his reputation as one of the most formidable tank commanders of the war. Survival, he had learned, was a matter of calculation, courage, and cold-blooded precision. By late 1944, Otto Carius had become a legend among his peers and feared by his enemies. His experience, honed through countless skirmishes and battles, had transformed him into a master of the Tiger tank. But mastery was not just about knowing the machine. It was about understanding its limitations, its strengths, and the psychology of the enemy. Carius often emphasized patience. In one engagement near the outskirts of a devastated village, he lay in wait for over 3 hours, hidden behind rubble and snow-covered walls. The Soviet T-34s advanced confidently, their engines a steady hum in the frozen air. From his concealed position, Carius observed patterns, noting which tanks were scouts, which were commanders, and which could be isolated. He knew that attacking prematurely could be fatal. When the moment was right, he struck. The Tiger's 88mm gun fired with unerring accuracy, neutralizing 2 advancing tanks before the others could react. Smoke, fire, and twisted metal marked each impact. The Soviets attempted to regroup, but Carius anticipated every move, adjusting position and angle, turning the battlefield into a deadly chessboard where he controlled every piece. Despite his cold efficiency in battle, he remained mindful of his crew. Each man had a role, and their lives depended on their cohesion and trust. Orders were precise, concise, and executed without hesitation. The harmony between Carius and his crew allowed them to operate like a single organism, a lethal machine in human form. That winter, his tally of destroyed tanks continued to climb, a reflection not of luck, but of skill, discipline, and relentless study of both his tank and the enemy. Otto Carius had proven that strategy, timing, and courage could turn the tide of any engagement, making him one of the most respected and feared tank aces of the Second World War.
The spring of 1945 brought some of Carius's most daring and dangerous operations. The front lines were collapsing, and German forces were stretched thin. It was a time when every engagement was high stakes, and every decision could mean life or death. Yet Carius remained undeterred, applying his years of experience to navigate seemingly impossible scenarios. In one notable encounter near the Rhine, Carius faced a column of Soviet tanks advancing under heavy artillery cover. Outnumbered and exposed, most commanders would have retreated. not Carius. He relied on speed, deception, and precision. Using the terrain to his advantage, he maneuvered the Tiger through narrow gaps between ruined buildings, avoiding direct lines of fire while creating opportunities for ambush. Every shot was calculated. He targeted lead tanks to break formations, used smoke and dust as camouflage, and coordinated with his crew to ensure each angle was covered. The enemy underestimated him, assuming the Tiger could be neutralized with concentrated fire. Instead, Carius turned the battlefield into a lethal trap. Tanks were disabled one by one, their crews scrambling in confusion, as Carius pressed forward, always staying 2 steps ahead. Even amidst the chaos, he maintained a clear mind. He observed enemy reactions, anticipated their strategies, and adjusted instantly. His crew's trust was unwavering. Each member understood the precision and timing required to survive under his command. By the end of the day, a dozen enemy tanks were destroyed, and the battered Tiger returned to friendly lines relatively unscathed. The operation showcased not just Carius's tactical brilliance, but his fearless resolve and adaptability under extreme pressure. In a war defined by numbers and machines, he proved that intellect, courage, and mastery of one's craft could alter the outcome of a battle.
As 1945 drew to a close, the war on the Eastern Front was relentless. German forces were in full retreat. Towns and villages lay in ruins, and every day brought new dangers. Otto Carius, now a seasoned veteran, faced situations that tested not only his skill, but his endurance and resolve. The Tiger tanks were fewer, ammunition scarce, and Soviet forces pressing from all directions. In one final engagement near a ravaged town, Carius and his crew held a critical position against overwhelming odds. The Soviet armor moved in waves, each advance more desperate than the last. Carius relied on every lesson learned from years of combat: patience, observation, precision, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. His crew mirrored his focus, moving as one unit, each action anticipating the next. Carius executed daring flanking maneuvers, striking at exposed enemy tanks while minimizing his own risk. He utilized the remnants of buildings, frozen rivers, and uneven terrain to create natural choke points, turning disadvantages into opportunities. Despite exhaustion and the ever-present threat of being overrun, Carius's strategy was methodical and precise. Every destroyed tank and disabled vehicle was a testament to his tactical genius and unyielding determination. Beyond the battlefield, he grappled with the toll of war, the weight of lives lost, the destruction surrounding him, and the knowledge that each engagement brought him closer to the end of hostilities. Yet even in these harrowing final battles, his focus never wavered. When the fighting finally subsided, Carius emerged as one of the most successful tank commanders of the war, having destroyed over 150 enemy tanks, a figure that placed him among the elite. His story was one of skill, courage, and unyielding perseverance, a remarkable example of how one man's expertise and resolve could leave an indelible mark on history. The war ended, but the echoes of battle lingered. Otto Carius walked away from the battlefield not as a hero in parades, but as a man shaped by steel, fire, and survival. His Tiger tank had been more than a machine. It had been an extension of his mind, his instincts, and his unyielding determination. Stories of his precision, daring maneuvers, and calm under fire spread among comrades and enemies alike. He had faced overwhelming odds, turned despair into opportunity, and etched his name into the annals of armored warfare. Otto Carius's legacy is not measured merely in tanks destroyed, but in the mastery, courage, and discipline he embodied, qualities that defined a soldier at the pinnacle of skill. In the quiet after the chaos, he remained a reminder that one man's expertise and unwavering resolve could shape the course of history.